And let me see if I can get this to go into presentation mode. There we go. And we're going to keep this informal today, girls. So you can certainly ask questions as we move through. But in these first 3 or 4 items, this is a little bit more of instruction, and you'll take notes on it. And then we'll be a little bit more interactive. But I'm willing to stop in the middle if you have a specific question. No problem at all. So our goal today is to talk about Tower Gardens for schools and nonprofits, and they really overlap nicely. So I want to expand your horizons from just schools, if that's where you started, to nonprofits, because most often a school is not a for-profit anyway. They really do overlap well. So first of all, the question I want to talk about is, how do you get started selling to schools and or nonprofits? And you know what I want to go back to, some of you have been in Juice Plus world for a while, and some of you are new to Juice Plus and Tower Garden. But one thing that we teach over and over in Juice Plus world, and I want to remind you of here with Tower Garden, is that we start with our story. We are paid storytellers. And what that means to you is you need enthusiasm, you need excitement, because your story is personal. And we want to share stories instead of facts in the beginning, because that's what gets people interested. It's kind of like the statement of people are not going to remember what you said, as how you made them feel. So we want them to feel your excitement first, and then they can get on board, and then we'll share the facts later. So that's kind of 101, you know, Juice Plus and Tower Garden, but I just want to remind you of that, because sometimes when we get a little nervous, we move into fact mode. It makes us feel better to have facts versus we might be uncomfortable sharing our stories in the beginning. So we want to get you very comfortable with your story. And I'm hoping that each of you is already growing food on a tower, because that's your story. If you're not yet, and Anna, I'm making the assumption that you are, you might have said that in your intro, I might have missed it, but you really need to be growing food yourself in order to share this solution. Anna, are you actually, I know the rest of us are growing food. Are you using a Tower Garden?
I am not. We have just moved back to DC from 7 years overseas, and it's not something that will ship to FPO. And unfortunately, we leave in 3 months to move back overseas. So yeah, the military has kind of hindered my ability in that area. So that was another one of my questions for the parking lot. It's like, how do I manage that?
Okay, perfect. Thank you for saying parking lot. I love that analogy. So we're going to talk about shipping and which countries and so forth. Thank you. I'll put that on the list. So going back to your story, you really need to grow food yourself on a tower or be highly connected to someone who's growing food. So that's your plan B, Anna. And when I say highly connected, it's people like Stephen Ritz with the Green Bronx machine. If you're not following him today, Stephen Ritz, R-I-T-Z, he is an incredible educator out of the Bronx in New York, and he has now created a nonprofit. He's doing amazing things with children and helping them grow food in one of the poorest areas of the, you know, New York area for sure, and maybe the country, I'm not sure. But start following people that grow food if you're not currently growing food. And that's a great idea no matter what. Even if you're growing food, you want to join the Facebook group that is called Tower Garden Official. You want to join the Instagram group, Tower Garden Official. And they say official because it's the corporate run social media. There are other Tower Garden groups that are for users to share questions, and sometimes they go down rabbit trails, and I want you to see what corporate has created for us to use as marketing tools, because they've created some incredible things and we want to use them. So anytime you see something on their pages, again, Facebook and Instagram, you can grab it and go and share it with not even asking. So that's what we love about this company, is that we share so generously, and they are creating professionally done graphics for us to use. And then they also just create some great ideas. Like they'll have some ideas for Valentine's Day, and you might want to post those. In other words, this is a great gift for your Valentine. So we've talked about, how do I get started? We share our story. If you're currently not growing food, you're sharing someone else's story, the Green Bronx guy, and or people on this call. Angela has a farm near Wilmington, and she's doing some incredible things. You want to follow her farm. It's called Two Chicks and a Hoe, HOE, Urban Farm. Right, Angela?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Instagram, they do an incredible job. And
that is a great name.
Thank
That is
you.
a great name.
Thank you.
And I have the t-shirts and I love them. I wear them all the time.
Yeah.
So start following other farmers. If you are not following me yet, you want to follow Severin Garrett and Greenhouse Towers, plural.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, everything. So we have a farm with 100 towers, and we love growing nutrient-dense food. But I did want to give you a little bit, before we move into which contacts, I want to give you a little bit of background on me. I started Juice Plus and Tower Gardens in Atlanta. And when they were first introduced to us at one of the Juice Plus live events or conference events, my husband was with me, and he got so excited when he saw it in this big, what would you call it? Big conference hall where they've got 10 or 12 of the towers set up. They're growing all kinds of things. And he said, we have got to try this. We have never been able to grow anything, and we want to try this. So that was what led me to buy one in the very beginning. They also told us, just like I told you, that if you want to share these or sell these, you need to be growing your own. So we bought one so that we could learn and then share it. And then what ended up happening is James and I don't have children. Our plants ended up becoming our children. So every day he'd come home and be so excited to go on the deck to check out the children. And, we started with seedlings and we went from there. We grew so much food the first year that it paid for itself in 9 months. So I love sharing that story with people. And I love sharing that we had a black thumb, not a green thumb. We'd never grown anything in the ground, and we had tried many times. So we had all this success with the Tower Garden first thing. So hopefully you're starting to feel my energy and my excitement as I'm sharing my story. I'm trying to give you something to emulate. If you're not quite there yet, and you haven't been growing food, you can use my story. So we started out with one Tower Garden. We had so much success, had so much fun. We would take every person out to the Tower Garden when we were going to cook dinner for them. We love entertaining, and we would let them pick their own lettuce. So we actually took the salad bowl outside with them and said, okay, what do you want to eat in our salad tonight? So we made it fun. We made it interactive, and people have photos of coming to dinner with us and picking their own grains. They love, that they picked their own, and then we took it straight to the table. So that went really well. One tower paid for itself in the first year. Second year, James is like, I want to grow tomatoes and I need a whole new tower for that. Typical man needs more stuff, right? So we ordered another tower with the cage and started growing tomatoes. That is definitely a learning experience. If you haven't done it yet, it was not easy because they just take over, but we had fun with it and we learned some valuable lessons. And now we love growing the cherry tomatoes the best because they're just so easy and they're so yummy. So that's our story. From there, we decided to look for a long-term plan that would allow us to move to our mountain community that we'd always dreamed about. So this was on our 10-year bucket list, get to the North Carolina mountains. And because we learned about the business opportunity of the Tower Gardens and being able to have a tower farm ourselves, we ended up kind of slowly moving into the tower farm world. And now we have 100 towers, and we provide greens to 2 local hospitals. I love that employees at a hospital, healthcare workers that are totally stressed right now, are getting fresh, organic, well, I'm not supposed to use the word organic, pesticide-free greens from the Tower Garden. So that's our story. And then we sell at local farmers markets, and we are having a ball with it. But it allowed us to move to our dream community and create an income stream. And it's really been a fun process. But anytime you start a new business, it's hard. It's not like it happened overnight. And it's not like we created all this income overnight. It's been a process. And especially, we got our food ready. In other words, it was growing and ready to be sold 2 weeks into COVID starting. So you know that story. All the restaurants were closed, and it was hard to sell food. We gave away a lot of food. Angela, you can relate.
Yes, ma'am.
So let's move into number 2. I was hoping to show you how to share a story. So you heard my story, you heard my enthusiasm, you can share my story. But if you have your own story, it's even better. So kind of put a little thought into how you can share your story with excitement and enthusiasm. And then we move into facts, which we'll do here in a moment. So which contacts or titles are best to share with? Let's start with the school. Someone gave me this suggestion. I've sold 40 towers into schools so far, and it's been somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 years I've been sharing with schools. So when I got started, someone said to me, connect with any teacher you know, any educator, just connect with them. And what that meant to me, and what she shared with me, is just text them, email, Facebook, whatever you have access to connect with them. And I would say things like, I am really having fun growing beautiful greens for my family, and I have a real passion for kids and helping them learn to eat great food because it's so healthy for their bodies, their brain development, yada, yada. So that's how I approached it. So I went and I probably contacted 20 teachers in the very beginning. I just made a list of teachers. So I had some in my church, I had some in my neighborhood, I had some that were friends of friends. So educators is the best place to start. They're not going to make the decision, but if you connect with them, they will help you get to the right person and make the decision. So in an ideal world, if you said who's the best contact in a school or a nonprofit, it would be their administrator. Some people call it principal, some people call it administrator. And here in my small town in North Carolina, I got to get in with the superintendent of schools. So he had 4 schools below him, and he allowed me to come share with his team of leaders. And I've gotten 2 towers up in his particular school system so far. So superintendent's awesome, administrators awesome, principals are awesome. At a nonprofit, it would typically be an executive director, or sometimes they call themselves CEO of nonprofits. So maybe you have a veterans group in your area, and you have some connections to them, like Brenda said. In my case, I've put Tower Gardens into homeless shelters for families. So these shelters are long-term places for the families to stay. So they can stay 6 months, 9 months. And so the nonprofit found funding for their, they call them residents, to actually have 10 towers put into a common area. So they have a playground because this is families with children who are homeless. And then they had some extra patio space. So we put towers into their common area. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. But I've put towers into a library in Atlanta. They had an atrium with beautiful light coming in. And so they put towers inside the library, and they're using it to teach kids and adults about growing nutrient-dense foods. So hopefully you're starting to get some ideas of who to reach out to. Even if it's just an employee of a nonprofit that you know, it's still worth starting the conversation and sharing your story. And I think the big thing with the story is you can share my stories about the library and or the homeless shelter. Those are all great examples of us helping people get nutrient dense food into individuals who really need to, have more nutrition. And secondly, teaching kids something that might be interesting and fascinating. Up here in my small town, the kids are bored with growing food in the ground. They think that's super boring, but they love growing food in the Tower Garden because it feels like, space age kind of stuff. So even my teachers say that the kids are much more involved and connected with the tower than they ever were with growing food in the ground. And I will state it here, most often I'm not trying to convince the school to only grow on a Tower Garden. I'm trying to complement their current growing methods. So most schools are already growing some kind of food, and typically it's a raised bed. So what I want to say to them is this might be a great complement. And the best part is it can be in the classroom and super accessible for the teacher. There are problems with getting the kids from the classroom out to the raised bed in many schools, because you got to have people following them. They got to be in line. You can picture these kids, all over the place. And then you also have issues with weather, and you have issues with how much time does it take to get them out and in. The kids are distracted. So teachers love that this can actually be in their classroom. That's a big, big plus. So we've talked about how do I get started? I share my story. We've talked about which contacts. And then I have people say this all the time. I have someone interested. Now what do I do, Severin? So what you would do, and thank you for joining us, Melanie. Let's say that you had a teacher say to you, Severin, this sounds fascinating. How would I learn more? So what I do and what works best for me is I try my best to jump on Zoom with them. And I say, would you or your administrator be willing to jump on a Zoom call so I can share more about the technology and how they're being used in other schools across the country? So it's kind of like in Juice Plus world. If you've been sharing Juice Plus, you really don't want to just send them information. You want to connect with them personally. And typically with teachers, lunch hour is the best time. And they are willing to take a few minutes, maybe 30 minutes over their lunch hour to get on Zoom and learn more about the tower. The same way with nonprofits. If they're an executive director or they're an employee of a nonprofit and the person says, I think there may be some interest here. We're supporting homeless people, like my example, this might be interesting. Then I say, great, I'm so glad that you work at Rainbow Village, which is the homeless shelter that I worked with. Could you get your executive director or administrator on a Zoom call with me? And the three of us could just learn more together. I promise it won't take you more than 30 minutes of your time. So your goal is to get them on a Zoom call. Now you're like, well, what am I going to show them on a Zoom call? I'm going to show you a presentation in a moment here that's really, really good. And you can pick and choose which slides you want. As a follow-up to this call, I'll send an email out and give you guys a couple of presentations that you could pick and choose from. But bottom line is you want to get them on the call, see their face like we're doing here, and then ask the question first. Tell me what's interesting to you about growing food for your school or your nonprofit. So we want to meet their needs first, and we want to listen to them first. Let them share for a few minutes, and then eventually say, well, I want to share my story. So you heard me share my story earlier. I won't go through that again. Or again, if you don't have a story, you can share my story. But you want to get them excited before you jump into the facts. So we know that stories sell and facts are just kind of boring. They don't really remember them. So share your story, hey, Tom, and then jump into one of these presentations. Melanie, if you want to mute yourself, that'd be great.
Message on your phone.
Let me see if I can figure out how to mute her. Here we go. So you have interest, and then you get them on the phone, a Zoom call, and I'll share with you some resources that might make sense. Okay, the biggest question is funding. How do these schools pay for their towers? How do these nonprofits pay for their towers? So bottom line is I say it up front and very early when I'm even just talking to the teacher before we get on the phone with the administrator. I say, I have put 40 towers in different schools across Atlanta and now North Carolina. And I have never had a school actually have to pull money out of their own budget. Usually they're able to find funding. And there is great funding out there for schools, particularly to help kids learn about growing really good food. So we have a few resources. Excuse me. The two that I mentioned off the top of my head, and you want to jot this down, is Whole Foods. They have a foundation that has funded many towers across the country for schools. So Whole Foods wants to help kids understand the value of nutrient-dense foods and wants to teach them about growing food. So Whole Foods is one. Second is Captain Planet Foundation. Captain Planet is based out of Georgia, and I'm not sure that they go outside of Georgia, to be quite honest, but it's a great one to mention because it's the Jane Fonda Foundation, and they have a real heart in helping kids grow food. So those are the two that I just mentioned off the top of my head. And then I say, as we get into it deeper, I can give you more tools and resources. But between us girls here on the phone, most of my schools already know about grants that are available to them. So for example, here in my small town, I went and met with the superintendent. I mentioned that earlier. He let me talk to his educators. I gave a presentation and he said to me, we have 2 grants that are coming up. Each of them is about, $1,500. I was like, perfect. That's what we need is about, and I always use the estimate of 1,000 to 1,500 per tower, because we want them to have the lights. Typically they're indoors and we want them to have some extra supplies. So you tend, or I would say new partners tend to think they got to fund the funding for the school. And that's not, we're not the best person to do that. We can help them. Like I just gave you a couple examples, but typically they are used to filing or creating grant applications. So we want to ask them, if you've had other projects in the school, how have you funded those? And some of my schools have a PTA. In other words, the parents are coming together and putting money into a fund, and they've used that to fund the tower for the school. Another school here locally, it's a private school, actually went to their alumni and said, families of alumni, and said, we want to add a growing program to our curriculum. Would you be willing to help us fund that? And they had one grandparent that stepped up and said, I'll put 3 in there for you. No grant application, no nothing. He just wanted to help that school have a more enriched curriculum. So I'm trying to give you lots of ideas of how this can be done. But bottom line is you don't need to be the expert on where to find funding. Most often they kind of already have an idea of how they found funding in the past. Another thing I want to mention to you is a school system in Atlanta. I had a person come to me and say they're in a, have you heard of the term food desert?
Yeah.
That means that the kids or the families are lower income and they would have to walk more than 2 miles to get to fresh produce. So in this case, this school system was in a food desert, and it was primarily a Hispanic school. And so the banker in that area was willing to fund 10 towers for that school system. We put 3 in the elementary, 3 in the middle, and 3 in the high school. So I hope what I'm doing is kind of expanding your horizons on who might be willing to fund Tower Gardens. It's not you trying to find it. It's you trying to just be creative and give them ideas of what others have done. So hopefully I've answered the question about funding. resources. That's what we're going to jump into next, which what are some of the resources that you would use if someone had some interest? What would you share with them? So before I move on to that and pull up that presentation, let's take just a minute and let you guys ask any questions you have.
I think you're stuck with me.
What?
I said, I think you're just stuck with me.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm really interested in trying to approach a school system. Are they typically private schools? You're saying you're having some interest with public school systems as well? Like, is there a ladder that they have to, even if you went with a teacher, then they have to go with the principal and the principal has to go with the school board? Is it easier just to approach somebody from the top and work their way down? Or can you start with the teacher?
You can totally start with the teacher.
Yeah.
If that's your connection. In an ideal world, you'd start with the principal. But
Right.
to be quite honest, out of those 40 towers that I have put into school systems,
Mm-hmm.
80 to 85% of them are public.
Really? Okay.
So only a
Right.
few are private. Now, charter schools are a little more progressive in their thinking, and those are still public schools, but they're, you know, supposed to be a higher academic level. In Atlanta, I had a few charter schools that were public, but they receive special funding because they're a little more progressive in their curriculum. So
Yeah.
anywhere
I
in
just
there is
know
fine.
the school I went to when I was a kid, a Montessori school, they would have been all over it because we constantly had to grow something, or it was always a hands-on learning process.
Mhm.
Don't have a whole lot around this area, but that'd probably been the first type of school system I would try to find. Like I said, out here, it's kind of hard to get people to think a little differently.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It's frustrating sometimes, but I'm just getting started, so I'll figure it out.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
I think just kind of planting seeds is important and it gives you good practice. So get started with a few seeds in your area. And then sometimes, you know, a parent, like your connection is, you know, a friend who has kids, and you say, where do your kids go to school? How
Right.
do you, are they growing food there? You know, so you
Right.
don't always have to actually have the direct connection. Sometimes the parent will introduce you to the teacher
Right. Okay.
or the administrator.
Okay.
Anna, before we move on, do you want to ask any questions?
I did have one question. Have you had any success since you moved getting towers in schools outside of your area? So I feel like I'll be able to plant some seeds and make some connections, but then, you know, my kids won't be in DCS anymore and we'll be living overseas. And I don't know really success through.
You're breaking up just a tad, but I think I understand your question. I am still selling schools into Atlanta and I'm 5 hours away. So they, you know, some of the seeds that I planted before I left Atlanta are now coming, you know, to full fruition. So I would say absolutely plant the seeds. You can do everything on Zoom, just like we're talking about. And we can place the orders, as you know, depending on where you are, from anywhere. So I have had success putting towers into schools when I'm not in that area. Yes. But I think it's the perfect time for you to be planting seeds while you're there and making connections with people. But you could, let's use this example. You're going to live overseas, and I would just start looking at all the folks in your Facebook feed that might be educators, and start connecting with them at a little bit, you know, more intentional level, and then asking them if they might be open to learning more about how to, you know, put some towers within their school systems, or helping you get involved with the administrator in some way. Great question. And
Can I ask one follow-up there? It just occurred to me. Do you tailor your presentation for the age group of the school so that like a Montessori preschool versus like a private high school?
yes, yes. And you'll see that that's what I'm going to move into next, is the presentation. that I really love because one of my team members created it, who's, much more graphic artist oriented than I am. But what you will do is pick and choose certain slides that are appropriate for the, elementary, middle, or high school. And I will tell you that I've had public schools in Atlanta purchase the tower for the kindergarten. Can you believe it? I mean, those kids are not going to really know how to grow food, but they had a teacher that was highly committed to raised beds and taking the kids out and showing them how to start from seed and things like that. So she used the tower in some creative ways. Let me just give you a few examples so it'll be some things that you'll remember. She used it as a reward system. So when the kids were really good in kindergarten, they can't really perform academically. So it would be more about their, listening, paying attention, and staying in their seat kind of thing. But she would keep track of who did really well that day, and she would allow them to read to the Tower Garden. What? Or, maybe do spelling bee with the Tower Garden. So it was just like a fun activity. They got to sit in front of the Tower Garden and they got to practice some of their skills. And so she hyped it up. She made it super fun. And then we also have some great curriculum for kindergartners because it's a coloring page that they actually get a Tower Garden outline and they're putting in different plants and coloring them with different colors. So maybe they're doing strawberries in one. And, when they're in kindergarten, they can create plants that wouldn't necessarily be the best Tower Garden plants, but they could put an eggplant on one, which is purple. They could put this or, something like that. But they're practicing learning skills in front of the Tower Garden, which is super fun. And we've also had a special needs teacher get a Tower Garden for her classroom. And she used it, as, again, a reward system that the kids got to do some special things with the tower each day or a couple times a week, whatever. And they learned better discipline. They learned, all kinds of different skill sets because they wanted the activity of being close to the Tower Garden. So those are some interesting ideas and concepts for you. Let me go on to the resources that are available. If you haven't done it already, you can choose to move my screen so that this is in speaker mode for you, and then you can see the full screen. But sorry, I didn't mean to go forward. If this is covering up anything for you, then feel free to move and just be in speaker mode. So this is a presentation that my team member, Nicole, created because she's done really well with schools. So you can see there's a lot of energy, an exceptional teaching tool. This can bring new and exciting curriculum to many subjects. And I'll share this with you later and you can use it as you see fit. She's pointing out the benefits first: no digging, no weeding, no pesticides, and no green thumb needed. And she's painting the picture. This is the future of gardening at your school. I love this. What are Tower Gardens? She's explaining in a visual format. They are aeroponic vertical gardening tower. They use air and water. They save 98% of the water, so you can, I don't have to read every point to you, but you can expand on any of these or all of these. And the one that really is most effective for my teachers is just reducing the footprint. In other words, they're used to having a garden that's 10 by 10 or 20 by 20 in order to grow just a little bit of food, but they're going to be able to grow a lot more in a 3-foot area of their classroom. So these slides are excellent. Here's the 2 models. I like to explain that they have choices. If they want to grow outside, we typically would suggest the Flex. If they want to grow inside, which is 90% of my schools, then we would want to go with the home unit. And you can see the details there. It gives you all the details: 32 plants, 16 regular, 16 micro. And we can come back to micro later, but I love the visuals on what's included in the kit. And notice at the top, it says comes with everything you need to grow from day one. Perfect. Makes it so simple. How are the towers made? And this is something that many of the administrators ask about. Food grade plastic can withstand years and decades of UV sunlight. They're expecting that these towers have a 30-year lifespan at a minimum. And then I talk a little bit about Tim Blank, who was formerly with Disney. That gives them great credibility, and that the parts are interchangeable, and we can create a custom experience for them. How does it work? I'm not going to read every point for you, but you can use these slides because people are curious. How does it work? You don't have any, soil. So the visual of the water coming from the bottom to the top on the left is the colander. You can show the rock wool in the middle, and then finally on the right, as they're adjusting the minerals so that the plants are getting the proper minerals. You feed and fill your tower, once a week. How does this method work so well? And this is a little bit about the certification that, Tower Garden has. Herbicide-free and optimal growing environment, 100% natural. I do love to share this. This is the University of Mississippi study, and that they're the leading school of agriculture in the US, and that they have done a study. It's actually a white paper study that we can share with them that shows to us and to others that this yields about 30% more than traditional growing. So they grew basil, spinach, lettuce in the ground, and then they grew them in the Tower Garden. And they did the white paper to show the results. So they grow three times faster, and they use as little as 2% of the water. That's a little bit more about the study. I think some of these slides are a little overkill, but you can pick and choose what you really like. And then we're starting to talk about schools. And this is Stephen Ritz that I mentioned earlier to you. And so he's out of the Bronx, and I love to tell his story at this point and just share that. And you really want to go to YouTube and watch a few of his things, but he has a real heart for children and teaching them how to eat better and grow nutrient-dense food. So then she's outlined the 6 reasons that schools love towers. This is kind of a fun visual with some of the kiddos growing food, and they're going to be eating that food, obviously. And then she's sharing a comprehensive guide that's available for teachers. And this is, I'll give you the link when I follow up with the email. This is a newly developed teacher's guide for schools, obviously. And it's just got some great details as the teacher gets started with growing food. We can also use these tools with the nonprofit. Even though they're saying school and a lot of it is about curriculum, we can use the same tools. So now she's starting to move into curriculum. And these are free things that we provide to every educator. So, you can see that they are professionally done. They can print them out. They can use them as they see fit in their current lesson plans. Some of these are for really young kids, and some of these are for older kids. So they start at kindergarten and they go all the way up through finishing high school with things that are appropriate for that age group. I do like to hit on the point that this is a culinary thing for many schools, and the teachers, as you can see here, use this as part of their curriculum. They're growing food and then they're taking it straight to the kitchen to teach the kids how to make pesto in this example, top right-hand corner. Food ideas and, of how other schools have used it. And, I will give you a story about one of my schools in Atlanta. It was I think a middle school, 4th through 6th grade, but they were trying to get STEM certified. And so one of the curriculum or the criteria for getting STEM certified as a school in Atlanta was that they were growing food and they were using food for the kids to learn how to prepare items. So we grew basil in the tower, and then we used that to create pesto, and then the kids created some menu items and sold their pesto at a food truck environment to the parents as they came to get them in the afternoon. So they went full circle. They grew the food. They made the food into something, incredible. And then they learned how to sell the food. In this case, sell the pesto. So, and the kids learned how to change money and they learned how to market. So there's just all kinds of ways that you can do this. And the teachers are usually very creative, but if you will give them some ideas, that will go a long way. So sharing these things are really important. Here's some science ideas. Again, STEM teachers, science, technology, engineering, and math love some of these, interesting science things about fertilization. What's the function of stems? We've got all that available for them to grab and go and put into their classroom. A little bit more about science. Again, you can take slides out because this is a rather lengthy presentation, but I like for you to have it all and you can pick and choose what you want. Literacy lessons, how to read, how to use the tower to help the children learn to read. So we're just painting the picture of different ways they can use the Tower Garden within the classroom. Now she's moving into some of the things that others have said about Tower Gardens. I love these quotes. The 21st century technology at its finest. I can create my own grow times here and inspire nutrition in my students. I won't read every one to you just due to time, but you can pick and choose which ones of these really work well for your audience. And the Green Bronx machine is one of my favorites. And we have some great YouTube videos that we can share on the Green Bronx machine. So she's got several from him. You might not want quite that much, but he does these numbers and shares them. How many pounds of vegetables grown in the Bronx, those kind of things. Teacher satisfaction with the Tower Garden. Okay, so I'm going to take that off screen share. I went through that rather quickly, but I was hoping to paint a picture for you of what's available and knowing that you could customize that to a nonprofit as well. Anna, there was a question that you had me put in the parking lot about shipping.
Yes, ma'am.
So right now, the towers can be shipped anywhere in the US, obviously, and into Europe. So they just opened up the European market in the last few months. And so, for example, we have sent towers to England because we have family in England. My husband is British. So, but we've sent them to homeowners, and I have not yet sold to a school in England. So that's not necessarily my experience. There are a few countries like we tried to get some into Mexico, and currently we can't deliver towers into Mexico. And the reason why, just so you know, is there are all these really specific rules about importing things into other countries. In other words, the liquids that we use, the small A and B solution, are very difficult to get approved to move into other countries because they monitor what kind of things, come in a liquid format, that kind of thing. So we sold a Tower Garden farm to Iceland, for example. So Iceland has some incredible legislation, and it got stuck on a barge for about 4 months until we could get everything approved that this was actually just, fertilizer, growing materials, those kind of things. So two things you should understand: homeowner unit for a school or an individual, a little bit more difficult to ship outside the US and Europe. But if you want to sell a farm, which you would work with someone like us, we're considered an approved tower farm rep. We can send, 10 towers to Mexico. So it's a little bit more wide open when they want to look at a farm. But typically a school's not going to look at a farm. I just wanted you to understand that there are options, and you do get paid 10% on any lead that you bring to the table for us to help you with. So we would do the selling in that case, and you're just bringing the lead to us and doing the introduction. So again, Tower Garden homeowner units, US and Europe. And I'm not sure exactly which countries. We'd have to go online and look, but I think it's pretty much the EU. And
So this-
Britain's included in that. Anna?
Two questions. What is the minimum to be considered a farm?
Okay, great question. A farm, the towers we need to have 10 towers or more, and most often they're going to go higher than the homeowner unit. In other words, they can go as high as 8 feet tall, 11 pots. So the homeowner unit has 5 pots in it. In other words,
Okay.
the Legos fitting together. But
Right.
you may know that we have a community garden available for you to sell as a Juice Plus rep, and those have 12 towers, but they're all homeowner unit size. So if you're going higher and or maybe even they just really want to have the lower units, 6 or 8 pods, but you can't send a tower to Iceland, for example, and this was a way around it. We were able to get them to purchase 10 or more towers. So we can work with you on that and how to make it work.
Okay. And then my second question is, I think, so, we're military, and so we don't typically, okay, we don't typically get our mail through the local post. We get it through what's called FPO, Foreign Post Office. So it's technically shipped within the United States, but there's some weight restrictions. And so I don't know if it's changed, but when I was looking into it when we lived in Bahrain, the weight was too high for them to be able to ship it through the FPO.
Okay, yeah, that's really technical. I don't have the answers to that, but we could research it for you. When you actually have, a prospect, 1 unit would be fine, I'm pretty certain. But if you're trying to do 10 or more, the Tower Farm corporate group ships those in pallets. So that's probably why they're kind of heavy, because Angela just got a farm a few months ago and hers came in, how many pallets, Angela?
It's 4.
4 pallets.
4, and that was
yeah.
for 15 towers.
Yeah. So we'll work with you, but sometimes there's a way around that. So like I have some people that they ship their towers to a local residence or a local business because they have a relationship, and it didn't come through a traditional channel. So we can help you figure out some options. But yeah, there would be, if there's weight restrictions, there may be some challenges there.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to receiving the email and the presentation and staying in touch via email. I saw you sent me a Facebook request, so I will accept that as soon as I kind of get through the chaos of this crazy day.
Yeah, and I'm going to attach you'll notice it's a lot more simplistic, my presentation to like an elementary school or something. And it has maybe 8 slides because I really like to keep it concise and short. You'll notice that Nicole, whose presentation we've been looking at, is quite, long. There's 27 slides there. So you don't need all the slides. You can pick and choose what works for you. But you can also choose to go really simplistic and just print out my 8 slides in color and take it and do it in the old-fashioned way if you get to sit down with somebody. All right, Angelo, any questions before we bounce off the call? I want to be sure that we're being respectful of your time.
No, I'm in here trying to sling some tower gardens. I think I just sold another one while you were on.
Oh, awesome. Good job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, now that I have some better idea of how much the numbers are, because I think before when I bought mine, I wasn't really paying attention to how much I spent on them.
Mhm.
And then of course with the Tower Garden Farm, there was so much more involved, and I would just throw out odd numbers. People were like, my God, I'm not paying that much. But once I made the order today, and I was like, oh, it wasn't that much money anyway. So let me go ahead and reach back out to these people, particularly before the prices go up.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Anna, you should know that the prices are going up March 1st. You may have seen the email yesterday, just like Juice Plus is going up, the towers are going
Okay.
up. And so if you have anybody on the, fence, you want to go ahead and reach out to them and just say, I'd love to help you get one sooner versus later at the best price. But Angela, you're right. I say it over and over. I use the budget of about $1,000 to get started for a homeowner.
Yeah.
And they could add some accessories, but I usually say somewhere, $600 to $1,000. If you want an outdoor unit that's basic, not much, any extra bells and whistles, it's about 600 to 700. If you want to add some bells and whistles, it might be about 1,000.
Well, yeah, well, that was the thing, is $1,000, people look at you like deer in headlights, but when you break it down to $55 a month with the $600, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's doable. So anyway, that's why I said
Yeah.
that first order this morning gave me a little bit more reality about what the pricing really is. And so I can approach somebody with $55 a month and they're like, oh, that's fine, particularly because most people are coming to me, they're like, you can't find any lettuce in the grocery stores.
Mhm.
And with inflation this year, they're gonna be spending more than $55 a month on any type of vegetables. So
No,
it's
you're
easier
totally
just to have it
right.
in your backyard. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of a no-brainer. You just have to get somebody past the thought process of it's gonna be too difficult. And that's what happens when people see what I'm doing
Yeah.
is, oh, that's too complicated for me. And I'm like, it's not. And so that's overwhelming. So then I kind of have to bring them back down to just let's just think about one thing at the time instead of making
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And so like talking to you this morning about the restaurant person, it might be easier to start with one tower and then
Right.
introduce them to more towers once they kind of get it together.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
And something that you said that I'm so glad you brought up is we do share the story that we paid $50 a month for our tower, and it paid for itself in 9 months. So I like explaining that there's a monthly option because homeowners like monthly options,
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
schools typically want to pay in full, but that's a little different model. So hopefully you've learned some good things for homeowners and schools and nonprofits.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks for joining us. I'm going to
Thank
turn
you.
off the recording and I'll share with you guys the recording as well as